Once again, I'm deeply honoured to be asked to speak at the Hopkins Centre Symposium. This symposium is critical in creating a space where frank and fearless conversations can be had to make the world a better place for people with disability to live their lives with dignity and free from discrimination and receiving health and rehabilitation services in Queensland and Australia. I too acknowledge the traditional owners on the land that we meet, the Jagera and Turrbal people. I pay my respects to the elders past, present and emerging. Additionally, in acknowledging the oldest living culture, I also acknowledge their wisdom in the use of science, medicines, land management and preservation of the land in order for all species of life's survival. I've been asked to briefly speak to whether people with disabilities' human rights are being respected, protected and fulfilled by the state in situations of risk and humanitarian emergencies, which is Article 11 of the CRPD, and it's an extension of Article 10, the right to life. Article 1 sets out the purpose of the CRPD, and in particular, it requires the state 3 levels of obligation: promote, protect and enable the realisation of the human rights and fundamental freedoms of persons with disability. The article also requires state parties to promote and respect inherent human dignity, which is the ultimate source of all human rights and freedoms. Firstly, I'm just going to talk about the CRPD's committee assessment of Australia's compliance to Article 11. For those of you who do not understand the workings of the UN, every 4 years, Australia has to provide a report on how they are meeting the treaty that they are signatories to. And Australia is signature to 17 conventions, and the CRPD is the last one. So in the sense of the compliance to Article 11, I'm taking a brief summary from a research report commissioned by the Royal Commission into Violence, Abuse, Neglect and Exploitation of People with Disability. This document was written by Emeritus Professor Ron McCallum, the inaugural chair of the CRPD committee, a great Australian with a disability. In February 2009, 2 years after Australia ratified the CRPD, the Victorian bushfires and their subsequent inquiries alerted Australian governments to the necessity of considering persons with disabilities and other vulnerable groups when planning responses to disaster situations. The development of appropriate plans and response took some time. In 2013, the CRPD committee's concluding observations expressed concern that disability had not been factored into Australia's local, state and national emergency plans and recommended that it establish national consistent emergency management standards in consultations with persons with disabilities. In its combined second and third periodic reports of September 2018, Australia noted that its national strategy for disaster resilience was endorsed by the Council of Australian Governments, COAG, in February 2011 and was relevant to the strategy being implemented in a nationally consistent way. Australia also wrote it had recently established a National Resilience Task Force to develop a new 5-year disaster mitigation framework for Australia. This new framework will be guided by the Sendai framework, including as it relates to persons with disability. The Australian Human Rights Commission observed in 2019 that these provisions are not yet in place. In June 2018, the National Resilience Task Force held a 3-day meeting with members of all levels of government, business and the community to develop the National Disaster Risk Reduction Framework. Effectively, a roadmap of actions to be taken from 2019 to 2023 and is designed to guide Australia in reducing risks that flow from disasters for its citizens. It is concerning that the NDRRF fails to mention disability. This is not surprising, as the first 2 sections of the Sendai framework do not address a disability. However, the 3rd section does. The 3rd section was then delegated to the Australian Disaster Preparedness Framework, which was developed by the Australian Government in consultation with state and territory governments. The ADPF is a high-level strategy document which leaves many of the details of disaster recovery to the state and territory governments. Persons with disabilities are only mentioned once, under discussion of mass care, the ability to meet essential needs and provide care to high volumes of affected citizens, both in and away from impacted areas. This includes, but is not limited to, health, psychological, aged, pharmaceutical and disability care. This limited mention is disappointing and limits recognition of disability to the context of health, rather than a consideration and integrated throughout disaster preparation and response policies of all governments at all levels. Professor McCallum concludes in this chapter that it is clear that Australia is working to ensure that its people are protected and cared for when disaster occurs. However, persons with disabilities and their representative organisations have not been adequately dealt with or considered or included in planning thus far in this area as required under the CRPD. The most recent Royal Commission in the 2019-2020 bushfires presented an opportunity to provide further comment on Article 11. However, the letters patent do not make any reference to disability. To tell you a couple of stories that have been presented will highlight how people with disability have been treated in the pandemic. The Brisbane Times on October 11th reported in a recent 4-day hearing of the Disability Royal Commission, it revealed the terrible toll the pandemic has taken on people with disability. The picture that emerged from the hearing is of a nation divided in the treatment of its citizens in time of emergency. Too many have been left to fend for themselves in frightening and unprecedented circumstances. The hearing took evidence from 36 witnesses, many of whom are people with severe disability. Witnesses spoke of the sudden loss of support services essential to daily life, lack of access to basic necessities such as food and medication, and uncertainty about the prospects for survival in the face of prolonged disruptions to essential care and support. Witnesses told of other harrowing experiences, extreme stress and anxiety caused by the potential exposure to the virus through contact with different casual support staff coming in on a daily basis, if they came at all, a lack of personal protective equipment, both for the person with disability and support staff. Some witnesses expressed a fear that people with disability would be given a low priority for access to life-saving treatment or care simply because of their disability. This fear was part of a more general theme that people with disability feel devalued. Witnesses explained that some language that is widely used makes them feel that they are regarded as a burden. As a burden on the community. Disrupting commentary on social media conveys a message that COVID-19 is about survival of the fittest and that the fittest do not include people with disability. That was quoted in the Brisbane Times. I share this fear based on my professional and personal anecdotal experiences of my advocacy for vulnerable people over 20 years and being a member of the team of the Public Advocacy Report, Upholding the Right to Life and Health, a review of the deaths in care of people with disability in Queensland, 2016. Many of those deaths were very preventable. The following case study of a witness at a recent Royal Commission hearing reinforces that Australia is still failing to respect and protect and fulfil persons with disability as articulated in Article 10 and 11. A disabled woman had caught COVID-19 from a support worker after the National Disability Insurance Agency refused to allow her sister to provide care instead during the pandemic. The woman's sister, I will refer to as a witness from here on, told the Commission that her sister's mental state had rapidly declined after being without care for almost a month as a result of the decision. The witness also is a professional support worker. She reapplied again in August following her fears for her sister's safety and mental health. The requested was denied. The witness said her sister, who lived alone in Melbourne's inner north, was aged in her 40s, never would have caught the virus if the NDIA had approved her application. An NDIA spokesperson said the agency had a range of measures in place to ensure the well-being of participants during the pandemic. While we recognise the challenges of the coronavirus, funding of family members to provide paid support is not agreed except under very exceptional circumstances. Usually only where all other suitable support options have been exhausted, he said. Her sister now has been without formal care since July 24, while her support worker, who she had a close bond with and trust, had been in intensive care. This is a clear case that demonstrates Australia is still failing to fulfil its obligations to respect, protect and fulfil persons with disabilities' human rights. If in a pandemic, I cannot see how this wasn't an exceptional circumstance. Thank you very much.